Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. First, I want to say thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala who has given me the opportunity to be able to make this video presentation, and also to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, in this video, I will explain the learning material that I have designed for the Adobe Flash JS application. Before I explain what products I make, let me introduce myself. I am Auliya Putri with student ID number 19029136. I come from the Mathematics Department of Universitas Negeri Padang. Okay, before I have a plan to create a mathematics learning design using a Macromedia Flash 8 application. Because my Macromedia for free use has run out, for that I can't use it anymore. But I use other media is Adobe Flash JS to design learning, where Adobe Flash JS has the same feature as Macromedia. In my opinion, the difference between the two media is not much different. It's just that the location of the feature is different, and the advantages of the Adobe Flash JS is that it can use Script 3.0. In this Adobe Flash JS media, I design learning media for quadratic function based on basic competencies 3.3 and 4.4. Okay, on this media, first I start this media with welcome mathematics learning, and this is the start button to start learning, and we'll go to the main menu. On the main menu, there are the profile button, goals button, material buttons, and evaluation button. And there is also an instruction button for this learning media. Okay, first we start the instruction. Because this instruction button will tell use this media. This is the back to main menu. This is the button exit button. This is the forward button, and this is the backward button. And we go back to the main menu. Okay, then we check the profile button. Student can click the profile button. On this profile button, there is my identity, such as name is Auliya Putri, number, student ID number 19029136, and study program, math education. And we go back to the main menu. The student can click home button. Okay, we go to the goals button. On the goals button, there are the basic competencies and indicators, and also learning objective. For the basic competencies, 3.3, explain quadratic function using table, equation, and graph. And basic competencies, 4.3, presenting quadratic functions using tables, equation, and graphs. And there are the indicators based on basic competencies, 3.3.1, the meaning of quadratic function, 3.3.2, properties of quadratic function based on their coefficient, 3.3.3, determine the axis of symmetry and the optimal value of the quadratic function, 3.3.4, understand how to graph a quadratic function, 3.3.5, determine the quadratic function from the various available information. Okay, next. This is the learning objective. After following the learning process, student can identify the meaning of the quadratic function identify the properties of quadratic function based on their coefficients, determine the axis of symmetry and the optimal value of the quadratic function, understand how to draw a graph of quadratic function, and the last learning objective, determine the quadratic function of the various available information. Okay, we go back to the main menu. And then we go to the material menu. Click the material button. In this material, I divide several submaterial. There are 3 submaterial here. Okay, and the first material about quadratic function. In this material, there are the definition of quadratic function, equation from graph of the quadratic function, determine the turning point of the graph of the quadratic function, and the last, draw a graphical sketch of quadratic function. Okay, first, equation from a quadratic function. This is the definition of a quadratic function. This is the equation form. Fx is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c with a, b, and c element real number and a is not equal to 0. Next, this is the example for definition of quadratic function. If fx is equal to x squared plus 2x minus 3 as a value of a is equal to 1, b is equal to 2, and 3, and c is equal to minus 3. Okay, next, we click the close button. Next, graph of the quadratic function. This is the graph of quadratic function. I give to student description about the graph of quadratic function, and I give to student some information on the graph of a quadratic function. And next, this is the example, the point of interaction of the graph with the x-axis. And then I give the student from the picture below, what conclusion can you draw? Is your conclusion the same as the following description? Okay, student can write the conclusion, the picture below. Okay, next, this is the conclusion. This is the example, the point of interaction of the graph with the y-axis. And this is the conclusion. And we close the session. And we go next to the determine the turning point of the graph of the quadratic function. This is the general form, the quadratic function. And this is has the vertex coordinates of x, y with x is equal to minus b divided to a, y is equal to minus b divided 4 times a, for d is equal to bx squared minus 4ac. Next, this is the example for the coordinate of the turning point of the graph of the quadratic function. This is the equation. The solution is first, determine the coefficient of equation. Then a is equal to 1, b is equal to minus 4, and c is equal to minus 5. Next, determine the xp is equal to 2, and determine the yp is equal to minus 9. And so the coordinate of the turning point is 2, minus 9. And we close the session, and we go to the draw a graphical sketch of quadratic function. This is the draw a sketch of the graph of quadratic function. The step of draw a graph sketch of the quadratic function. Next. Okay, this is the example of draw a graph of the question function. The solution is, first, we find the instruction point of the equation. And for x is equal to 0, and then y is equal to minus 5. We substitute to equation to find the y-axis, and so on. And then we enter the value of x and y that we have been looking for on the Cartesian coordinate graph. Point A 0, minus 5, point B 1, 0, point C 2, 3, point D 3, 4, point A 4, 3, point A 5, 0, and point 5, point P 5, minus 6. Okay. Then all the dot we connect a downward curve is formed. And from the graph we get the axis of symmetry. X is equal to 3, optimum value of y is equal to 4, and turning point is 3, 4. Okay, we close the session. And then we go to the properties graph of a quadratic function. This is the properties graph of quadratic function. First, based on the value of the coefficient x squared. Second, based on the value of the coefficient of x squared and the value of the coefficient of x. Third, based on the constant value. Fourth, based on the discriminant value, or D. And the last properties is based on the value of the coefficient x squared and the value of discriminant, or D. Next, first, this is the definition. Properties based on the value of the coefficient x squared. If A more than 0, the graph opens upward so that the graph has a minimum turning point. And if A less than 0, the graph opens downwards so that the graph has a maximum turning point. Next, this is the graphic shapes. The graphic of quadratic function based on the value of A are as follows. This is the graph. If A more than 0, so the graph open upwards and then has minimum value. If the value of A less than 0, the graph open downwards and graph has maximum value. Next, this is the definition. Properties based on the value of the coefficient of x squared and the value of the coefficient of x. This is the properties. If A more than 0 and B more than 0, then the graph open up and the vertex is to the left of the y-axis. And if A more than 0 and B less than 0, the graph open up and the vertex is to the right of the y-axis. If A more than 0 and B is equal to 0, the graph is on the y-axis. If A less than 0 and B more than 0, the graph opens downwards and the vertex is to the right of the y-axis. If A less than 0 and B less than 0, the graph opens downwards and the vertex is to the left of the y-axis. And the last properties, if A less than 0 and B is equal to 0, the graph is on the y-axis. And this is the graphic steps. The graph of quadratic function based on the value of B are as follows. This is the value A more than 0 and B more than 0. This is the graph. And this is the graph if value A more than 0 and B less than 0. And this is the value B is equal to 0. And this is the graph of if A is less than 0 and B more than 0. And the last, this is the graph of if A more less than 0 and B less than 0. Next, this is the description properties based on constant value. Next, this is the graph. And the fourth properties is based on description value. This is the describe of properties. Next, this is the graph shape on the based on discriminant value. And the last properties based on the value of the coefficient x squared and the value of the discriminant or d. This is the properties of graph, the quadratic function based on the value of a and d. And next, this is the graph shape based on the value of a and d. And we close this session. We go to the graph question of quadratic function. First, to 3 points. This is the definition of 3 points. And this is the general question of quadratic function. Next, this is the cut the x-axis at 2 points. This is the general form of cut the x-axis at 2 points. And this is the tangent to the x-axis. This is the describe of tangent to the axis. And the last equation is stroke the vertex. This is the description, and this is the general form of stroke the vertex. And this is the example of find the equation of the graph of the quadratic function. And this is the solution. We close the session. Okay. We go to the evaluation. In this evaluation menu, I ask students to enter their name and class on this slide. And student can write the name. And student can write the class. So the student can click start to start doing the evaluation. To answer the questions, student can directly click on this ABC option and we'll continue on question number 1. Click. And this is the test value and score about the evaluation. And then I give the solution about the evaluation. This is the solution number 1. This is the solution number 2. And this is the solution number 3. And then this is the solution number 4. And the last, this is the solution number 5. Okay, I think that's all for me to explain about the learning material that I have made. Thank you so much for your attention. If I have long words or listen, please forgive me. Thank you. Share and friend. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.